as so stupid and dysfunctional that he cannot locate a carton of milk in his own refrigerator. This is blatant Bush administration propaganda aimed at poisoning the minds of children and young adults. Shame on you. In this case, Ron was all for censorship, in a good cause, of course. If I could say that to him now, he would laugh. At our lunches in Toronto or Vancouver, there were still questions, because his curiosity was as vast as his knowledge. At the last of these, he seemed to be in a serene mood. More recently, it was my turn to pester him with questions of my own, because I was writing a novel set in a newsroom in Vancouver in the early 50s. I was almost able to picture him as one of my characters. Ron said he was looking forward to reading my book. I wished I had finished it in time. There are some things in the book that might have made him laugh, and I would have liked to hear again that explosive burst of laughter and see the eager, lingering smile that came afterwards. But now he has left the room. Thank you, Ron, and goodbye.
Hi, I'm Brian McKenna. I'm one of his producers at the Fifth Estate. Glorious years they were. But first I want to read some tributes from three other people. David Halton. Ron, how I miss the ideas and vigor and humor that you brought to our lunches in recent years. Yours was a career to celebrate. For many of us, you are a model of what hard-hitting, accurate journalism should be. And who can forget your letters to the Globe and the New York Times with their witty and scorching comments? You left us with much to treasure. From Anton Koshani, the senior producer, executive producer at W5. Ron was my boss, mentor, and friend. When I first became senior producer at W5 and handled my first screening, with some trepidation, I thought to myself, I'm Ron Haggart now. How would he handle this? He was brilliant and one of the last of a generation of great newspapermen. Alan Burke. I was one of the lucky producers who got to work with Ron when the Fifth Estate went to air in '75. It was both an intimidating and a rewarding experience, and I guess that never really changed. In fact, one of the last times I saw him just a year or so ago, he was walking along Bloor and I was in my car. Coincidentally, he just had a letter published in the New York Times. Knowing what I was in for, I rolled down the window and shouted out. He came straight over, blocking traffic, proceeded to expand passionately on the issue. Of course, it was fascinating. Traffic be damned. Ron knew his story when he saw it and knew how to tell it. He was a great writer. Eric Melling once said he possessed a golden pen. His wealth of knowledge was vast, but best of all, Ron was generous with his time, his knowledge, and his appreciation. And from myself, the poet Emily Dickinson has always provided me with promising guideposts to deal with the going. Dying, she writes, is a wild night and a new road. Haggart knew something of both. Roger Sarti, Glenn Sarti's son, told me that his dad always wondered how Ron could be so productive with story meetings that started at 1 in the morning. Of course, it was the very best time to pitch to Ron. That's where the new road, the idea of the new road entered. Ron's preference in stories was always to take the road no one else would take. There was no forbidden territory. Whether it was the John Kennedy assassination, CIA brainwashing in Montreal, or a nest of Slovak Nazi collaborators in southern Ontario. He wanted our films to be bulletproof, factually, but he would also ask the so what of a story. He always wanted to know the so what of a story. Why does it matter? And he was a public broadcaster, sans pareil. The idea of comforting the afflicted and afflicting the powerful was something that was in his soul. In our shop, he was compassionate as hell, giving the fallen second and third chances. At the Fifth Estate, he helped plant the roots so deep it's been impossible to kill the show no matter where they put it. Like many of us, he started as a print person. He was exceptional with concision. In the edit suite, with deadlines only hours away, he often found the perfect phrase, the perfect paragraph that would at once keep Danny Henry and Michael Hughes happy, and at the same time elevate the episode from being good to becoming an award winner. Besides his splendid journalism, Ron was a boon companion, at times Falstaffian. One weekend I invited him and Maggie to join us in the country. Ron called to ask if Carrie May, still in swaddling clothes, could come along. I said absolutely. Then he called back and said, "Could the nanny come?" I said, "The more the merrier." So Maggie and Del Mondo, I think, the nanny and Carrie May arrived, and we had one of those fantastic weekends. And I remember the final afternoon we roasted a saddle of lamb over a spit, and then at the end of the meal, Ron sort of gathered himself up, and he had a glass of Beaujolais in one hand and a cigarette, and the other hand balancing a cognac and a coffee. And he looked at me with the most shit-eating grin. So he's at the heavenly Hop and Grape with Mowling and Peter Riley waiting for the rest of us. Thank you.
I'm Mike Feinshober, and I'd like to tell you about the Ron Haggart I knew and the Ron I barely knew. Back in 1967, Stanford University set up a fellowship for mid-career journalists. The idea was that they would have time to recharge their batteries, to reflect, to attend classes or not, to meet and challenge some of the brainy professors of Stanford's brainy faculty. I was accepted for the founding class, and so was Ron. I was a reporter for United Press International. You all know that Ron was a towering, and sometimes glowering, figure in Canadian journalism. I can only wonder what Ron thought about accepting a fellowship funded by an auto baron at a university funded by a railroad baron. We had a wonderful time. I rode a bicycle all over that sunny California campus. Ron decidedly did not. On a field trip, we went to Sacramento to meet the new governor, an actor named Ronald Reagan. Ron and I shared a seat on the bus and a dismay over Reagan's politics. We became casual friends. Our political thinking was in sync. We had curiosities that were kindred. When our sunny interlude ended, we returned to our jobs. Starting sometime in the 80s, we would reignite our friendship at Stanford once every 4 years for a few days of reunion chatter. Then, sometime around 2000, email came along and allowed the conversation to resume on a daily, even hourly basis. Ron sent me his judgments, complaints, observations, nitpickings, screeds, and lectures, generally about Canada's superiority. From his emails, we can know that Ron had a years-long battle with the New York Times for its failure to fix errors he had spotted. Ron crusaded for the U.S. Supreme Court to follow Canada's example and televise arguments before it. He fumed that U.S. historians ignore Canada's role as a terminus of the Underground Railroad, which transplanted runaway slaves to Canadian freedom. After the Bernard Madoff scandal arose, Ron wrote the Globe and Mail, with a copy to me, that, quote, "The Canadian media will, as usual, overlook the fact that Charles Ponzi, the man who gave his name to the Madoff fraud, learned his evil ways in Montreal." He scolded the New York Times for failing to recognize that U.S. legislation cannot keep foreign ships out of the Great Lakes, that, as he put it, there's another country involved. And he lectured Americans about misreading their Constitution. Wrote Ron, the phrase to bear arms is distinctly and uniquely military in meaning. Soldiers bear arms. Hunters and sharpshooters possess, have, or own guns. The mechanics of the Electoral College can allow the winner of the most votes in presidential elections to lose, and that drove Ron to his keyboard time after time. Whenever Ron found someone writing that George W. Bush won the 2000 presidential election, he called him on that. George W. Bush, he would scold, was anointed president by the highest court in the land. Ron tumbled late to the existence of Google. So sometimes he'd ask me about some obscure piece of history, and I'd find the answer in Google in a flash. He'd come back in 30-point type, demanding, "How did you know that?" That was my Ron Haggart. I didn't know much about him. I had no idea. He never told me that he had been a crusader and a curmudgeon of Canada-wide prominence. I knew him as a friend who knew everything about anything.
I'm Karen Flanagan McCarthy, and between 1980 and 1984, I was the publicist on the Fifth Estate, and I worked with Haggart. Not Ron, it was always Haggart. I've known Haggart more than half my life. When I first met him, he was younger than I am now, and I didn't need any glasses. Now I need 2 pair. He started as my boss. He became more of a colleague. And as Anton was saying, he was a friend. He was a mentor. He taught me a lot about writing. Many evenings and late afternoons, not always with white wine, I spent time with him at Film Arts, and I learned a lot about storytelling. He also taught me how to make an excellent martini, and I have the typewritten recipe. If any of you would like it, I can send it to you. He also taught me in terms of writing and storytelling that really I should stop being a publicist and get on with what I really wanted to do, which was to become a journalist myself. And to do that, of course, I had to leave the network. I moved to Ottawa, and I first started with CBC Television News, the local program in Ottawa, and then went on to radio, which he said would be easy for me because working in radio, he said, is like feeding the goat. Like tons of stories, you'll be fine. He took journalism very seriously. He took the stories very seriously, but he didn't take himself too seriously. And he had a wonderful, wonderful sense of play. It might come as some surprise to you that we spent hours playing Pac-Man, the first and only video game that I ever played, and I never played as well as he, though on the evening of my 30th birthday, I did, with him, bust 30,000. He bought hundreds of dollars of lottery tickets with me. We spent an inordinate amount of time working out a very elaborate way of choosing the numbers for the 649, and I think the best we ever did was we won $10, which probably was good in the end. He also, this is before the internet, loved to shop, and he did a lot of shopping by catalogs. He also shopped, he loved wine, of course, we've already established this, and he bought wine on auction down in the United States. And I'm originally from the United States, and my family still lives there. He would ship the wine to my mother's house, and I would smuggle it across the border, a few bottles at a time. What I did not know until I married one of my colleagues at the CBC, an editor by the name of Paul Michel Thibault,